They laughed when he dug where his grandfather's map showed. What he found changed everything. The gray vinyl seat of the bus was cracked, its stuffing peeking through like a sad, yellowed smile. For 247 miles, I'd watched the world through a film of grime on the window, the city giving way to suburbs, then to fields brown with the stubble of a late autumn harvest. Each mile was a small act of erasure. 18 years old, a legal adult, free. The word felt hollow, like a bell rung in a vacuum. It was supposed to mean something, but all it meant to me was that the door to the group home had finally locked behind me for good. I had a duffel bag with 3 changes of clothes, a worn paperback, and a sealed manila envelope that felt heavier than everything else combined. If you've ever felt like you were starting from absolute zero, with no safety net and a past you'd rather forget, you know this feeling. It's a mix of terror and a strange, quiet thrill. Hit that subscribe button if you're here for stories about second chances, because that's what this channel is all about. This was the first day of mine, and I had no idea what was coming. My social worker, Miss Albright, had given me the envelope that morning. She was a woman made of sensible shoes and tired, kind eyes. For 5 years, she'd been the one constant in a life of shifting foster homes and institutional beige. Her office smelled of stale coffee and paperwork. "Leo," she'd said, pushing the envelope across her metal desk. It made a soft, scraping sound. "This is it. Your grandfather Arthur left it in trust. It couldn't be opened until your 18th birthday." I just stared at it. My grandfather. A ghost I carried in the shallowest parts of my memory. A man with hands that smelled of soil and sawdust, a laugh like rocks tumbling downhill. He was the one who taught me how to skip stones and identify constellations before the state decided his ramshackle farm was no place for a 10-year-old boy. They said he was unfit, negligent. I hadn't seen him since. He'd passed away 2 years ago, a fact I'd learned from a clipped official phone call. "What is it?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "The deed to his property," she said, her tone carefully neutral. "In rural Blackwood County, about 5 hours from here. There's also a key and a personal item he left for you." She paused, her gaze softening. "Legally, it's yours now. All of it. The land, the house, the barn, and the back taxes." Of course, there was always a catch. The system gives with one hand and reminds you of your debt with the other. "How much?" $3,412, she said, reading from a file. "It's 2 years overdue. The county will seize the property and auction it off in 90 days if it isn't paid." 90 days. I had $200 in my pocket. Severance pay from a world that had owned me since I was 10. The math was simple. Impossible. "He also left you this," she said, sliding a smaller, sealed envelope from the larger one. My name was written on the front in a shaky, familiar scrawl. Inside was a key, heavy and iron, the kind you see in old movies, and a piece of paper folded into a tight square. It was a hand-drawn map of the property, rendered in faded blue ink. It showed the house, the barn, a creek, and a large oak tree. Near the tree, a small, red X was marked with a note. "Start here." It felt like a joke. A cruel treasure map from a man who'd let me be taken away. I wanted to crumple it, to leave it on her desk with all the other useless pieces of my past. But I couldn't. It was the last piece of him I had. "There's a bus ticket in there too," Ms. Albright added gently. "One way. It leaves in an hour." So here I was, rattling toward a place I barely remembered, toward a debt I couldn't pay, and a house that was probably collapsing in on itself. The freedom I'd been handed felt more like an eviction notice. The bus hissed to a stop at a crossroads with a single blinking yellow light. A signpost, half swallowed by ivy, read, "Blackwood, 5 miles." This was my stop. The driver grunted as I grabbed my duffel bag from the overhead rack. "End of the line for you, kid." He wasn't wrong. I stepped down onto the gravel shoulder, and the bus pulled away with a sigh of air brakes, leaving me in a cloud of diesel fumes and profound silence. The air was different here. It was cold and sharp, smelling of damp earth and wood smoke. There were no sirens, no traffic, just the rustle of dry leaves skittering across the asphalt and the distant caw of a crow. I was alone. Truly, completely alone for the first time in my life. I slung the bag over my shoulder, the weight of the key in my pocket a cold, hard promise of something. I didn't know if it was a beginning or just a different kind of end. I turned toward the road leading to Blackwood and started walking. The 5 miles felt like a pilgrimage to a forgotten grave, my own. The town of Blackwood wasn't so much a town as a collection of buildings that had forgotten to fall down. A gas station with faded paint, a general store with a sagging porch, a church with a steeple that leaned just enough to look tired. I walked past them, my city sneakers feeling flimsy on the cracked pavement. A few faces turned to watch me from behind dusty windows, the silent, assessing gaze of a small town for an outsider. I kept my head down, my hands jammed in my pockets, the iron key a cold talisman against my palm. The address from the deed was for a road a mile out of the main settlement. The pavement gave way to gravel, and the houses grew farther apart, replaced by fields and dense woods. The chill in the air deepened as the sun began to dip below the tree line, painting the sky in bruised shades of purple and orange. My breath plumed in front of me. I was starting to regret not owning a warmer jacket. Finally, I saw it. A rusted mailbox, tilted on its post like a tired old man, with the name Vance barely visible beneath a layer of rust and grime. My grandfather's name. My name. A dirt driveway, more of a suggestion than a road, disappeared into a thicket of overgrown trees and thorny bushes. This was it. This was my inheritance. I pushed my way through the grasping branches, their thorns catching on my thin hoodie. The driveway opened into a clearing, and I saw the house. My breath caught in my throat. It was worse than I'd imagined. The 2-story farmhouse sagged in the middle, its spine broken. The white paint had peeled away to reveal weathered gray wood beneath, like bones showing through skin. Windows were broken, dark eyes staring out into the twilight. The porch roof dipped precariously, held up by a single rotting pillar. A massive oak tree, the one from the map, stood sentinel beside it, its bare branches clawing at the sky. It wasn't a house. It was a ruin, a monument to decay. And it was mine. For a long moment, I just stood there, the silence of the place pressing in on me. The weight of the last 8 years, of every foster home, every slammed door, every night spent staring at a ceiling that wasn't mine, came crashing down. I had been given nothing. A pile of rotting wood and a bill for $3,000. I felt a surge of hot, bitter anger at my grandfather. What kind of legacy was this? Was this his final, cruel joke? I wanted to turn around, to walk back to the highway and stick out my thumb and just go, anywhere. But where? I had nowhere else. This ruin was the only thing on earth that had my name on it. With a deep, shuddering breath, I walked up the 3 groaning steps to the porch. A loose board shifted under my weight, and I nearly fell. I reached the front door, its wood swollen and cracked. The lock was a chunk of rust. I pulled the heavy iron key from my pocket. It looked ancient, like it belonged to a castle dungeon, not a derelict farmhouse. I slid it into the keyhole. It grated, resisted. I put my shoulder into it, jiggling the key, turning with all my might. For a second, I thought it was hopeless. Then, with a loud, protesting shriek of metal, the lock turned. The sound echoed in the quiet clearing. I pushed the door. It scraped against the warped floorboards and swung inward into the darkness. The air that rolled out was thick and cold, carrying the scent of dust, mildew, and trapped time. It was the smell of a place that had been holding its breath for a very long time. I stood on the threshold, peering into the gloom. Inside, furniture was draped in white sheets, ghostly shapes in the fading light. A thick carpet of dust covered every surface. Cobwebs hung from the ceilings like macabre chandeliers. This was my kingdom, a kingdom of dust and ghosts. I stepped inside, and the door swung shut behind me with a mournful creak, plunging me into near-total darkness. I fumbled for my phone, my fingers clumsy with cold, and switched on its small, inadequate flashlight. The beam cut a nervous path through the shadows, illuminating a living room frozen in time. A sagging armchair, a stone fireplace filled with old ashes, a wall of bookshelves lined with dusty spines. It was exactly as I remembered it, only smaller, sadder. The memories were thin, like old photographs faded by the sun. Me, a small boy, sitting on my grandfather's lap by that fireplace as he read to me. His deep voice rumbling in his chest. A feeling of safety I hadn't felt since. The flashlight beam landed on a photograph on the mantelpiece. I picked it up, blowing a cloud of dust from the glass. It was him, Arthur Vance. A man with a weathered face, a wild beard, and eyes that crinkled at the corners, even in a serious photograph. He was looking right at the camera, right at me, with an expression I couldn't quite decipher. It wasn't smiling, not exactly. It was determined. I traced the frame with my finger. "What did you leave me, old man?" I whispered into the cold, silent house. "What am I supposed to do with this?" The house offered no answers, only the quiet settling of dust and the whisper of the wind through the broken panes of glass. I spent that first night on the floor, wrapped in one of the dusty sheets from the furniture, my duffel bag for a pillow. Sleep didn't come easy. Every creak of the old house, every rustle in the walls, sounded like a footstep, a whisper. It felt like the house was watching me, testing me, or maybe I was just listening for a ghost. The next morning, I woke up stiff and cold, the pale dawnlight filtering through the grime on the windows. The reality of my situation settled in with the morning chill. No electricity, no running water, and 90 days to find over $3,000. It was an impossible, ridiculous task. My first instinct was still to run, but the image of my grandfather's face in that photograph stayed with me, that determined look. He wasn't a man who gave up. I decided to explore. If this place was mine, I needed to know the full extent of the disaster. I started with the house, room by room. The kitchen was a time capsule from another era. A cast-iron stove, a hand pump for water at the sink, shelves lined with mason jars filled with things I couldn't identify. Upstairs, 2 small bedrooms. One was clearly his, a simple iron bed frame, a wooden chest at its foot. The other was empty, save for a small, child-sized bed in the corner. My room. A wave of unexpected grief washed over me. I had been happy here once. The most promising place, according to my faint memories, was the barn. My grandfather had spent most of his time there. It was his workshop, his sanctuary. The massive sliding door was stuck fast. I had to use a rusted crowbar I found on the porch as a lever, putting all my weight into it until it groaned open just enough for me to slip through. The inside of the barn was vast and cathedral-like, with shafts of dusty light beaming down from cracks in the roof. It smelled of hay, oil, and old wood. Tools hung in neat rows on the walls, each with its place. A workbench ran the length of one wall, covered in half-finished projects, wood shavings, and strange metal contraptions. This was the heart of his world. I ran my hand over the scarred surface of the workbench, feeling a connection to him that the house hadn't given me. This was where he worked, where he created. I remembered something then, a fleeting memory. Him sitting on the floor of the barn with me, prying up a loose floorboard. "Every man needs a secret place, Leo," he'd said, his voice a low rumble. "A place to keep what matters." My heart started to beat a little faster. I scanned the barn floor, a patchwork of wide, rough-hewn planks. I started walking, testing each one with my foot, listening for a hollow sound, looking for a board that didn't quite fit. It took me almost an hour. I was about to give up when my foot caught on the edge of a plank near the back wall, hidden behind a stack of old tires. It shifted. My hands were shaking as I knelt down. I worked my fingers into the gap and pulled. The board came up with a screech of old nails. And there, nestled in the dark space beneath, was a metal box. It was an old army ammunition case, painted olive drab, with a heavy latch on the front. It wasn't locked. I lifted it out. It was heavy. I set it on the workbench, the metal cold against the wood. For a moment, I just stared at it. My breath held tight in my chest. This was it. The secret place. The place to keep what matters. I wiped the dust from the lid with the sleeve of my hoodie and unhooked the latch. It sprang open with a sharp click. I lifted the lid. Inside, there was no money, no gold, no jewels. Just a stack of envelopes, tied together with a piece of twine. They were addressed to me, and beneath them, a thick, leather-bound journal. I picked up the top envelope. The paper was yellowed with age. "For Leo, to be read first," was written on the front in my grandfather's hand. My hands trembled as I untied the twine and broke the seal. This was the personal item Ms. Albright had mentioned. This was the real inheritance. I unfolded the letter. The page was filled with that same familiar, spidery script. "My boy," it began. "If you are reading this, then I am gone, and you have come home. I imagine you are angry. I imagine you feel abandoned. You have every right to feel that way. But I need you to listen. I need you to understand that what happened was not an abandonment. It was a protection." I sat down on an overturned bucket, the dusty light from the barn illuminating the pages. I started to read, and the story of the last 8 years of my life, a story I thought I knew, began to unravel. He wrote about my parents, killed in a car crash when I was 4, a fact I'd always known. But he wrote about the aftermath, about the other driver. The man wasn't just some drunk. He was part of a local crime family, a powerful man with deep connections. When he was sentenced to prison, his family swore revenge. They started with threats, notes left on the porch, a dead animal in the mailbox. They wanted to hurt my grandfather by taking the one thing he had left, me. "They made it clear they would wait," he wrote. "They would wait until you were old enough to understand, old enough to suffer." I went to the police, but the sheriff was in their pocket. No one would help. I was an old man on a failing farm, against a family with money and no morals. I knew I couldn't protect you here. The only way to keep you safe was to make you disappear, to hide you in plain sight. He had done the unthinkable. He had called Child Protective Services on himself. He manufactured the neglect. The messy house, the empty cupboards on the day of their visit. It was all a stage. He had made himself a monster in the eyes of the state to save my life. He had sacrificed his reputation, his heart, and his final years with me to put me into the one system where they couldn't touch me. He had let me hate him so I could live. I stopped reading, the letter shaking in my hand. My vision blurred with tears. The anger I had carried for 8 years, the deep, cold stone of resentment in my gut, it didn't just fade. It shattered. It was replaced by a wave of grief so profound it buckled me over. I cried. I cried for the scared 10-year-old boy who thought his grandfather didn't want him. I cried for the old man who had to watch his only family be driven away, knowing the boy would despise him for it. I cried for the years we lost, the stories he never got to tell me, the constellations he never got to show me again. It was a long time before I could pick up the letter again. There was more. He explained that he'd spent the last years of his life quietly gathering proof against this family, the same one that had threatened us. He used his journal to document everything: license plates of cars that drove by too slowly, names he overheard in town, quiet threats from their associates. He was building a case, piece by piece, a silent, one-man war from his forgotten farm. "The journal has everything," he wrote, "but it's my word against theirs. It's not enough, not on its own. They are powerful, Leo, and they are patient. They own half this county now, under a corporate name, Ridgeview Holdings. They've been trying to buy my land for years. It's the last piece they need to control the whole valley for a new luxury development. They will come for you. They will offer you money, more money than you've ever seen. They will assume you're a lost kid from the system who will jump at the first offer. Do not sell this land, Leo. Not for any price. Ridgeview Holdings." The name sounded vaguely familiar, like something I'd seen on a billboard on the bus ride here. "So why the map?" I mumbled to the empty barn. "Why the X?" The final paragraph of the letter answered my question. The land holds the final piece of proof. Something they buried here long ago. Something they think is gone forever. Something that can bring them down for good. I found it by accident, years ago. I couldn't move it, and I couldn't tell anyone without putting you in danger. So I reburied it, deeper. The map leads to it. You have to dig, Leo. It's the only way. This land is more than just dirt and trees. It's our home. It's our justice. Don't let them take it. I put the letter down. The world had tilted on its axis. My past was not what I thought. My present was not an empty inheritance, but a mission. My future was not a blank page, but a battleground. The house wasn't a ruin, it was a fortress. The land wasn't a burden, it was a weapon. And the map wasn't a joke, it was a battle plan. I had to stop and just let that sink in. The sheer weight of it. My grandfather hadn't abandoned me. He'd armed me. If this is hitting you hard right now, if you've ever uncovered a family secret that completely changed how you saw everything, I want you to let me know in the comments. Because in that moment, I felt like the loneliest person on the planet, and knowing someone else out there understands this feeling, it means a lot. You're not alone in this. The next day, I walked the 5 miles back into town. My purpose was different now. I wasn't a lost kid anymore. I was a soldier reporting for duty in a war I hadn't known existed. I went to the general store, the bell above the door announcing my arrival with a cheerful jingle that felt out of place with my mood. An old man behind the counter looked up from his newspaper, his eyes narrowed over a pair of reading glasses. "Help you?" he asked, his voice gravelly. "I need a shovel," I said, "a good one, and a pickaxe." He grunted, sizing me up. "Gonna do some digging." Something like that. He led me to the back of the store, where tools and hardware were stacked. I picked out the sturdiest-looking shovel and a heavy pickaxe. The total came to more than a quarter of my remaining money. As I paid, the man leaned forward. "You're Arthur Vance's grandson, aren't you? Saw you walk in yesterday. You got his eyes." I nodded, not sure if that was a good or a bad thing. "Folks from Ridgeview Holdings were in here last week," he said, his voice low. "Asking about this place. Said they'd be making the new owner a generous offer soon as he showed up." He paused, looking me straight in the eye. "Your granddad was a stubborn man. Never sold. Said this land had secrets worth more than money." I met his gaze. He was right. The man nodded slowly, a flicker of something, respect maybe, in his eyes. "Well, good luck to you, son." Walking back to the farm, the tools felt heavy on my shoulder, but it was a good weight. A weight of purpose. When I got back, there was a pristine white envelope stuck in the front door. It was embossed with a sleek corporate logo, Ridgeview Holdings. My stomach tightened. I tore it open. It was a formal, impersonal letter. It expressed condolences for my grandfather's passing and then got straight to the point. They were aware I had inherited the property and the outstanding tax liability. They were prepared to offer me $20,000 cash. They would handle the back taxes and all the paperwork. All I had to do was sign. $20,000. To me, that was a fortune. It was a new life. It was an apartment, a car, a future free from worry. It was everything I had ever dreamed of while staring at the ceiling in the group home. The easy way out. All I had to do was betray the man who had given up everything for me. I crumpled the letter in my fist. I thought of my grandfather's words. This land has secrets worth more than money. The next morning, I started digging. I went to the spot marked on the map, under the sprawling branches of the ancient oak tree. The ground was hard, packed clay, filled with roots and rocks. The first swing of the pickaxe jarred my entire body, the shock running up my arms and into my shoulders. This was going to be harder than I thought. For the first few days, it was just monotonous, back-breaking labor. I dug from sunup to sundown, my hands blistering, my muscles screaming in protest. A few cars slowed down on the main road, their drivers staring at the strange kid digging a giant hole in his yard. I heard a couple of teenagers laugh as they drove by. Look at that idiot, probably looking for pirate treasure. I ignored them, let them laugh. They didn't know what was at stake. Each night, I would collapse onto my makeshift bed in the dusty living room, too tired to even eat much. I'd light a candle and read more of my grandfather's journal. It was filled with his observations, his fears, his small victories. He documented every strange car, every veiled threat. He wrote about his loneliness, his heartbreak over what he had to do to me. I see your face in my dreams every night, Leo, one entry read. I hope one day you'll understand. I hope one day you'll come home and finish what I started. His words were fuel. They got me up in the morning when my body wanted to quit. They pushed me to swing the pickaxe one more time when my arms felt like they were going to fall off. I wasn't just digging a hole. I was unearthing a history. I was fighting for him. A week into the digging, a sleek black car pulled up my driveway. A man in an expensive suit got out. He was slick and polished, a stark contrast to the decay of my property. He looked at the hole I was digging, then at me, a faint, condescending smile on his face. "Leo Vance?" he asked, though it wasn't really a question. "Who's asking?" I said, leaning on my shovel, my clothes covered in dirt. "My name is Mr. Davies. I'm with Ridgeview Holdings," he said, extending a hand I didn't take. "We sent you a letter. I assume you received our generous offer." "I got it," I said. "I'm not interested." His smile faltered for a fraction of a second. "Perhaps you don't understand your situation, Mr. Vance. This property is condemned. The structure is unsound. The back taxes are due. Our offer of $20,000 is more than fair. It's a gift." "I'm not selling," I repeated, my voice flat. He sighed, a theatrical display of patience. "Let's be realistic. You're a kid who just aged out of the system. You have nothing. We're offering you a clean slate, a new start. Take the money, go to the city, get an apartment. Forget this. Ruin." Every word was designed to remind me of how small I was, how powerless. The old me would have believed him. The old me would have been intimidated. But the old me didn't know the truth. "This ruin is my home," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "And it's not for sale. Not for 20,000, not for 100,000. Now, unless you plan on grabbing a shovel, you're on private property. I suggest you leave." For the first time, his polished mask slipped. A flash of cold anger appeared in his eyes. "You're making a big mistake, kid," he hissed. "A very big mistake. We always get what we want." He got back in his car and sped off, kicking up a cloud of dust. The threat hung in the air long after he was gone. They weren't going to give up. I had to find what my grandfather had hidden, and I had to find it fast. The clock was ticking. The encounter with Davies lit a new fire under me. The work became less of a chore and more of an urgent race against time. I dug with a feverish intensity, my world shrinking to the ever-deepening hole, the scrape of the shovel, the thud of the pickaxe. I stopped going into town. I ate the canned goods I found in the pantry, food my grandfather had stocked years ago. I was living like a hermit, a ghost haunting my own property. The hole grew, 5 feet deep, 6, 7. The clay turned to dense, rocky soil. My progress slowed. Doubt started to creep in during the quiet, lonely nights. What if my grandfather was wrong? What if he was just a crazy old man, and I was digging for nothing? What if I was throwing away my only chance at a real life for a ghost story? I'd pull out his journal then, the pages worn and soft from my constant reading. His voice, clear and steady on the page, would chase the doubts away. He wasn't crazy. He was careful. He was methodical. He was brave. I had to be too. One afternoon, about 2 weeks into the dig, I was working at the bottom of the hole, which was now over 8 feet deep. I was exhausted, covered in a thick layer of sweat and grime. I raised the pickaxe over my head and brought it down with a grunt. Instead of the familiar, dull thud of metal hitting rock and dirt, there was a loud, hollow clang. The shock vibrated up the handle, jolting me. I dropped the pickaxe, my heart hammering against my ribs. I knelt down, my hands shaking, and started scraping away the dirt from the spot where the axe had struck. My fingers brushed against something hard, flat, and cold. Metal. I dug around it frantically, my bare hands scooping away the soil. An edge was revealed, then a corner. It was a large, flat metal plate, about 3 feet by 3 feet. It was rusted, but it was solid. It wasn't a rock, it wasn't a pipe. It was something man-made, something deliberately buried. It took me the rest of the day to clear the dirt from around it. It seemed to be the lid of a much larger object. There was a rusted ring set into the center. I looped a rope I found in the barn through the ring, braced my feet against the side of the hole, and pulled with every ounce of strength I had. The lid resisted, sealed shut by years of dirt and rust. I pulled again, my muscles screaming, my teeth gritted. With a groan of protesting metal, it moved. An inch, then another. I finally managed to slide it aside enough to see what was underneath. It was a makeshift cellar or bunker lined with concrete bricks. And inside, resting on the damp earth, were several long, wooden crates. The kind I'd seen in movies, used for shipping rifles or military equipment. My flashlight beam cut through the darkness of the hole. I lowered myself down into the small, musty space. There were 3 crates in total. They were old, the wood warped and stained. But stenciled on the side of each one was a logo and a name. It wasn't a military marking. It was the name of a chemical company. A company that had been shut down by the EPA 20 years ago for illegal dumping of toxic waste. A company that, according to my grandfather's journal, had been secretly owned by the same family behind Ridgeview Holdings. My blood ran cold. This wasn't a weapon in the way I'd imagined. It was something far more damning. With the crowbar, I pried open the lid of the first crate. The stench that hit me was acrid and chemical, making my eyes water. Inside, nestled in rotting straw, were dozens of large, glass containers filled with a thick, dark sludge. Many of them had cracked, their contents leaking out to stain the wood of the crate. This was it. This was the proof. They hadn't just threatened my family. They had poisoned my land. They had poisoned the whole valley. My grandfather had stumbled upon their dirty secret. This land wasn't valuable to them just for development. It was valuable because it was their private, toxic waste dump. They couldn't build on it without a massive, multi-million-dollar cleanup. A cleanup that would expose their crimes. Their plan was to buy the land, bury the evidence forever under a golf course and luxury condos, and get a government subsidy for reclaiming the land without ever admitting what was really there. They needed my signature to bury their sins. I climbed out of the hole, my mind reeling. The scope of their evil was staggering. This was bigger than my family, bigger than my inheritance. This was about the town, the water supply, the people who had lived here for generations without knowing what was lurking beneath their feet. I sat on the edge of the hole, the crumpled offer letter from Ridgeview still in my pocket. $20,000. They weren't trying to buy a farm. They were trying to buy my silence. They were trying to buy my soul. I thought about Mr. Davies, his slick suit and his condescending smile. "You're making a big mistake, kid." He had no idea. The mistake wasn't mine, it was theirs. They had underestimated the wrong kid. They had underestimated the wrong old man. I went back into the house and found an old digital camera my grandfather had kept in his desk. The battery was dead, but the charger was with it. I ran the generator in the barn for an hour, just enough to bring the camera back to life. Then I went back to the hole. I spent the next 2 hours documenting everything. I took pictures of the crates, the stenciled logos, the cracked jars, the leaking sludge. I took pictures of the illegal bunker itself. I photographed the pages of my grandfather's journal, every entry, every license plate number, every date. I created a meticulous, undeniable record of their crimes. The next morning, I didn't call the police. My grandfather's journal was very clear about the local sheriff being on the payroll. I couldn't trust anyone in Blackwood. I walked into town and used the payphone outside the general store. I made 2 calls. The first was to the Environmental Protection Agency's anonymous tip line. I gave them the address and a detailed, calm description of what I had found. The second call was to the state's top investigative journalist, a woman my grandfather had mentioned in his journal as being fearless and incorruptible. I left a message, telling her I had a story that would blow the lid off one of the state's biggest development companies. Then I went back to the farm and waited. It didn't take long. 2 days later, a convoy of official-looking vehicles came down my driveway. Men and women in jackets with EPA printed on the back swarmed the property. They were followed an hour later by a news van. The journalist, a sharp-eyed woman named Sarah Jenkins, listened to my story, her expression growing more intent with every word. I gave her copies of all my photos and my grandfather's journal. Mr. Davies showed up in the middle of it all, his face pale with shock and fury as he saw the EPA investigators and the news crew. He tried to bluster his way through, claiming it was all a misunderstanding, a smear campaign by a disgruntled teenager. But then the EPA team, using a crane, lifted the first crate out of the hole. The evidence was irrefutable. Davies was escorted away by state troopers who had arrived on the scene. The story exploded. It was the lead on the nightly news for a week. Ridgeview Holdings' toxic secret. The company's stock plummeted. The executives were arrested. The full scale of their corruption, reaching into local politics and law enforcement, was laid bare. My grandfather's journal was the key that unlocked it all, a roadmap for the prosecution. He had won. From beyond the grave, he had gotten his justice. The aftermath was a whirlwind. The EPA declared the farm a federal cleanup site. The back taxes were waived, and I was given a substantial settlement from a victims' compensation fund for the endangerment I had faced. It was more money than Ridgeview had ever offered. But by then, the money was the least important part. The cleanup took almost a year. During that time, I lived in a small apartment in town, paid for by the fund. I wasn't an outsider anymore. I was the Vance kid, the one who took down Ridgeview. People would stop me on the street, shake my hand. The old man at the general store gave me free coffee every morning. I wasn't alone. I was part of a community my grandfather had saved. When the cleanup was finally done, the land was declared safe. The soil was clean. The house, which had been protected during the process, was still standing, still sagging, still my responsibility. But it didn't look like a ruin to me anymore. It looked like a survivor, just like me. I used some of the settlement money to hire a local crew to help me restore it. We jacked up the foundation, put on a new roof, replaced the broken windows. We didn't modernize it. We brought it back to what it was. We sanded the old floorboards, replastered the walls, and got the old water pump in the kitchen working again. On the day it was finished, I walked through the rooms. They were filled with light. The air smelled of fresh paint and clean wood, but underneath it all, I could still smell the faint, familiar scent of my grandfather's home. I placed his photograph back on the newly repaired mantelpiece. His eyes seemed different now. Not just determined, they looked proud. I had found more than just toxic waste in that hole. I had found the truth. I had found my grandfather's love, a love so fierce he was willing to be hated to express it. I had found my own strength, a resilience I never knew I had. And I had found a home. Not just a piece of property, but a place where I belonged, a place with roots. Home isn't just four walls and a roof. It's a choice. It's a promise you make to the past and to the future. It's the story you decide to live in. My grandfather left me a broken house and a map, and it turned out to be the greatest gift anyone has ever given me. He gave me a chance to reclaim not just our land, but our name. He gave me a purpose. If this story meant something to you, if it reminded you that even in the darkest of places, there can be a map to a better future, please hit that subscribe button. This community is for people who know what it's like to fight for their story. Share your own experience in the comments below. What does home mean to you? I read every single one, and I believe, just like my grandfather did, that every story matters. Especially the ones that start with a hole in the ground and end with a second chance.